Very good evening and welcome to the University of Hong Kong Faculty of Education. My name is Cheri and I'm a teacher educator and assistant professor here at Hong Kong U. This evening I'm speaking directly to you from our classroom with 30 students from the Postgraduate Diploma in Education programme. And what's really special about them is that they're also full-time in-service teachers from different primary schools here in the Hong Kong community. Let's say a big hi to everyone first. Great job. Now here at Hong Kong U, we're very lucky to get to meet many distinguished scholars from the field of education from all over the world. Well, tonight is no exception. And thanks to the internet and social media, I'm really excited to be able to share with you the opportunity to engage in a conversation with a world-famous scholar. He's been ranked by Education Week as one of the top 10 most influential scholars in the world today. He has written numerous articles and books. He also happens to be one of the very few scholars whose books are so absorbing that they make it to my bedside table. He's a fantastic storyteller, so if you've attended Professor Hargreaves' talk, you'll know that he's just really inspiring and he's able to really help you understand what it means to be a teacher, but also how to make a change in this world as well. So let's put our hands together. A very warm welcome to Professor Andy Hargreaves. Your website, they've done their homework, and I know they have a lot of questions for you, especially concerning the core issues and challenges of teaching and learning in the 21st century. Our format is very simple. This is an interactive conversation, so you can take turns to ask questions until 7 o'clock. So we're going to be on Facebook Live until 7. And it's done in the format of a broadcast. But let's keep it informal. Feel free to ask, and I hope that we'll be able to leave this room feeling enriched and learn a lot from our conversations. So we're going to learn from each other as well. And I'd also like to welcome listeners following us on Facebook Live. So if you're listening, you're also welcome to post any comments, and we'll read out some comments as you post them during the hour. Does that sound okay? Yes. Okay, so first question, please. And we're going to go over to Darren, who's going to fire the first question for us.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. So, like I said, my name is Darren. I currently teach P3 and P4 levels here in Hong Kong with a focus on reading. My question is, when it comes to deep collaboration, is that just as viable in a TEFL situation? And is it more effective between same subject teachers or in an interdisciplinary capacity?
Well, thank you for your question, Darren. Just as we begin, I'd like to say how delighted I am to be tonight with an outstanding lecturer in teaching and teacher education, a world-class broadcaster, actually, at the same time. All of you who are in this wonderful profession that educates the minds of the future, and all the listeners out there who we don't know and can't see, but hope they are still with us in some way or another. And Darren, that's a great question to begin with, which is you're asking really about TEFL, but it applies to practically any subject. So what you would ask is, what are the issues about collaboration within a particular subject community? And I think it's two things. One is what you collaborate about and the way you collaborate. Do you get opportunity to collaborate with other TEFL people? So I'm going to remove my jacket because it is having friction with my microphone. Okay, how does that sound? Does that sound better? So one thing that many teachers complain about sometimes is that they're asked to, particularly in high schools, they're asked to collaborate with teachers about other things that have nothing to do with their subject, and they want to collaborate with people like them who have kids like theirs studying things that their kids do. We've, for instance, been working with teachers in small rural schools in the Pacific Northwest, where sometimes you're the only teacher of your grade, your year, like P2, P3, In your school, there's just nobody else to talk to within miles, so we've been trying to connect them across great distances so that they can plan curriculum together. And TEFL can be like that as well. A lot depends on your context of your environment. Sometimes you're the only teacher of TEFL in your school, so people think you're a bit weird or a bit strange compared to, are you a proper teacher compared to everybody else? And so two things matter. One is having access to other people like you with kids like yours, forming networks, communities across schools. And then the other thing is when you collaborate within your school, that we are able to collaborate across communities. We're able to, as some people say, break out of your silos. I love rock music actually, and pop music, and an old song from 1968 is called Breaking Down the Walls of Heartache. And what we have to do is break down the walls of heartache in our schools, between different subjects, between different communities, have respect for each other's expertise, and work on things together in a deep way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. And the next question comes from Puthi.
It's an honor to have a silver-haired scholar
Don't
with
tell them
engaging intellect and darting eyes.
Okay.
With engaging intellect and darting eyes. I hope you remember. Of course. Yeah, this is his own lines. It is from one of his a very nice article about presentism, individualism, and conservatism. Fine. I am Purthi, and I'm teaching 3 levels, P1, P2, and P4 in a local primary school. Now, my question is a bit wordy, so I have written it down. I'm going to read it out. You have advocated many great ideas like professional capital, teacher collaboration, professional learning communities, uplifting leadership, ethics, well-being, creativity, ethno-cultural tolerance, and many others. As a teacher-student, and in the beginning of a career as a teacher, I see that these ideas are amazing, yet predominantly theoretical. And I find myself discouraged in elaborating my thoughts on it or applying it at school. We are tied by standardized systems, mistrust, and oddly still some old racist mentalities. So what is that? What is your say on that? How do we rise up to these thoughts when the system suffocates us?
So, thank you for your question. I'm sorry, I missed your name right at the beginning.
Oh, it's Purthi. It's spelled P-O-O-R-T-H-Y. Purthi.
Ah, Purthi.
Yeah, Purthi.
So thank you for your question, Purthi. And your question is basically asking how the ideas sound great in theory. How do they work in systems that seem not the least bit congenial to them? Yeah.
Exactly.
I first should just clarify in your extremely flattering introduction that only some of those ideas are mine. So well-being, for example, the first use of well-being was by the World Health Organization in, I think, 1947. So it's a 70-year-old idea, and I'd love to say it was mine, but it's not. However, some of those ideas are mine. And so the question is where do they come from? And the ideas almost always don't come from the theory. Of course, I read a lot of theory. I'm a sociologist by training. I'm always interested in the relationship between, as I think every teacher should be, what's the relationship between your world, your work, and your life? So think about those 3 things. What's when you're teaching, what's the relationship between your world, what's going on in your world, how's it affecting your children and their families, how's it affecting what they bring to school, and how does it affect what they and you want them to be over time. So we need to be knowledgeable about the world. We need to read the newspapers. We need to be intellectuals, actually, ourselves within teaching. We need to think about our life and our children's life. Where does your work fit into your life as a human being, as a learner, as a person with other interests, as a mother, as a father, as a son, as a daughter, in the culture and society that you're in? Where does your work fit into your life? And then what is the work like? How is it organised? And not how is it organised ideally, but how is it organised? How is it organised here? And there are many people in the field I'm in. I think a little bit unusually is that I don't mainly rely on a lot of things that other people have written. I pay attention to it, but I don't do big analyses of what other people have found and then say, in general, it says this rather than this. I do have teams that work with me, so I work collaboratively as well as talk about collaboration. But in every study I do, it's always in schools or in school districts, and I always but succeed in getting directly engaged with collecting some of the data, being in some of the schools, seeing and listening to what teachers are concerned about, worried about, excited about in their environments. And then we, of course, if you're a teacher in your school, you see that in one classroom. If you're lucky, you may see that in 3 or 4 other classrooms. I don't get to be in a classroom all day, or week, or year, but I get to see lots of classrooms and lots of teachers, and then you learn that something that's like this over here is a bit different when it's over here in another school or another country. And comparison is the essence of research. And through those comparisons, you begin to develop ways of trying to capture in a very brief way and reflect back to people what you've seen in a very complex way. So some of these words, some of these phrases that come out, like professional capital, collaborative, professionalism, uplifting, leadership, they don't start at the beginning of our study. We read something and say, what a cool idea, we'll write a book on professional capital. No, somehow in the middle of the study, or towards the end of it, you think, how can I make sense of this? What is the term? What are people saying? What does the literature say about this? Where do I need to go? What do I need to read? And then you wake up in the middle of the night one night and you say, whoa, uplifting leadership. That's it. Usually as a result of conversations with lots of other people. So the first thing to say is, the ideas actually come from the practice, but they come from lots of practice in different places and comparing it with one another. They come from you, and they're reflected back to you, and if they don't make sense to you, then they're worthless ideas, basically. But where they do often make sense to many people like yourself is critically, is in the question, how can I do this in the circumstances that I'm in? How do I build collaboration and community in a hierarchical environment where people are telling us what to do all the time? How can I collaborate with my colleagues when my head teacher or principal would be terrified by the idea? How do I develop creative learning amongst my children, interdisciplinary learning, problem-based learning with other teachers when we're constantly assaulted by standardized tests? How do I do that? Would you like an answer to that question?
Yes.
Okay. So first is just to recognize it. It is a problem. It's a very common problem. It exists anywhere, and I'm not going to try and give you what we call in the West a Pollyanna solution. So Pollyanna means, whenever we are, you've got to be cheery, chirpy, optimistic, and everything will work out fine. So you have to be practical. But I think one school I remember very well in Singapore, and I've heard it in so many other schools, is a principal. So it's good if the principal thinks this as well as the teachers. If a principal says, look, what I tell my teachers is, of course the test results matter. But let's not mainly think about the test results. Let's mainly think about doing the right things with our students, on working as hard as we can, and getting the very best out of them. And if we do that, the test results will probably look after themselves. And this was for a principal of a high-performing school that was introducing robotics. And they worried, they said, what happens if the test scores fall? Then then the principal got the staff to take collective responsibility for that problem. So not to deny the problem, but to say, that is the problem. How will we deal with it within our school? And in the best schools I've seen, including some in very challenging circumstances, that's really the attitude that teachers take together, which is work together, use the best expertise we've got as a community. Work hard as well as work together. Do the right things, and the results will mainly look after themselves. It's harder if your principal doesn't support that idea. And so then there are two ways of thinking about that. One is, if the principal's not there for very long, the evidence is a strong community of teachers can outlast a weak principal or a bad principal, but it can't outlast two or three. And it can't outlast one of those principals over a very long period of time. If you're in a large school, the advantage of some bad principals is they don't know what's going on. Because they don't like people very much, they hide in their office. So the bad news is they don't know what's going on, and the good news is they don't know what's going on. So you can get together with two or three other people and start to collaborate in a quiet corner of the school. And your principal really need never know. And if you can't do it with people in your school, there's a thing called the internet now. And I know you don't do Twitter in Hong Kong, but you do WhatsApp. Okay? So use WhatsApp or other things, and you can collaborate with people online as well as offline.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pruthi, for that question. I think one of the things that we're going to do is to discuss some of these issues more, because next week we have a session on equity and inclusion. So this is perfect kind of preparation for that. So we can explore these issues, maybe do some tasks, and then, and I encourage you to bring some case studies as well to class. That'd be good. So we have another question, and Murray, you would like to ask a question.
Hello, I'm
Is that Murray?
Murray.
Murray, as in the river in Australia.
That's right.
So I'd rather call you Murray than Darling, actually.
Yes, please. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm a local primary school teacher. I'm a net teacher at a local primary school. And I enjoyed looking at your website about the ethno-cultural identities. And being a foreigner in Hong Kong, teaching the local children, I was wondering if you could share any of your ideas or experiences about teaching across the different ethno-cultural identities.
Oh. So I'm going to answer your question with a question, which is what challenge that you experience in your work is behind that question. So what do you find difficult or challenging in addressing differences in ethnocultural identity within your school?
I suppose one of them would be on the relating to the children, because they have a very different upbringing perhaps in the West.
Yeah.
And even just things like TV shows or films they watch, like they might respond very well to like some Asian programs or things, and I try and engage with kind of their values or what they find interesting, and I want to be able to do that better.
Oh. Well, you've hit the core of it, which is all cultures. First of all cultures have good and bad things about them. So I don't believe in a sugar-coated, we celebrate diversity because everybody's fabulous. All cultures have strengths and weaknesses, including the cultures that I come from and other people's cultures as well. And the point is to begin by understanding each other's cultures and engaging with each other's cultures. And the culture that people have is the culture they have. You can't wish it was something else. Our job as educators is to begin by engaging with people's cultures, respecting those cultures, sometimes challenging them, connecting them to each other, and introducing people to other cultures as well, including your own, but others around, because we live in a global context now. To do all that, the underlying philosophy is to see in all teaching, like if we begin with John Dewey or anyone else, to understand that whoever people are, whatever culture, even if it's somebody who looks or behaves almost exactly like me, I hope that person doesn't exist, because one of me is enough. But even if it's somebody exactly like me, is to begin with where they are and engage with where they are, to understand every child and to know what it is that they bring strong and less strong into the classroom. So I just sent out a message on Twitter, which none of you will have read, and it's an article in the Guardian newspaper. If you can stay with me for a second, I've just written a memoir of up to age 22, and it's a memoir of social mobility. So it's a memoir of my experience growing up in a poor family in the north of England, where my dad died when I was 12, my mother was on welfare. She was very sick for a while when I was 14, 15. She couldn't leave the house. She almost starved herself to death. She was depressed. My brothers were out in factories, and then one of them emigrated to Canada. And I never got to school for months on end before 11 o'clock in the morning. And if you read my school reports at the time, they all went down like this. And the only time I was aware, the school was aware of it, was when the truancy officer came round to my home. Why is this relevant? It's relevant because nobody ever talked to me about this, even though they were clearly aware of it. I didn't think of it as anything special or heroic. You're in a family, and you have to, whatever it is you have to get on with things. But before I got to school at 11, I'd make the fire, I'd vacuum the house, I'd get the shopping, I'd bring it in, I'd organise it until my grandmother could arrive and then take over. The point is that when I applied to university, and on the page was a list of things called hobbies. I didn't think I had any hobbies. I didn't think I had the kind of things that universities wanted. I didn't play a musical instrument. I didn't go into lots of clubs after school. I played out with my friends a lot. I organised a 270-mile hike with my girlfriend, but I didn't count hiking as a hobby. It was just a thing we did in our community. And I just stared at this space on the form, and I thought of all the things I'd not read, the clubs I didn't belong to, the instruments I didn't play. What I didn't realise, and all the universities we still apply to that don't leave any space on the form, is what about all those young people who have sick parents to look after, or who are looking after their own siblings and have to pick them up from school and take care of them until the parents come home, or somebody else can step in much later. And there's no space on the form for that, and yet that is as much character or responsibility as being in the Duke of Edinburgh's award outdoor education. In the time I grew up, these issues were one of social class. So there were middle class schools who didn't understand working class children and wanted the working class children to fit into the culture of the middle class school. And if you didn't, you always felt you were falling short, or you were acting or pretending, which is kind of how how I went through secondary school. And I hid my life at home and had to be a different way when I was at school. And I managed that, but many of my peers didn't do that. Now, we don't only think of that as poverty, but we think of that as race and cultural difference as well. But exactly the same things apply, which is the things that seem to us deficits when we look at them at first, things that children don't have or are missing, may, if we inquire more closely, look at assets. So, if people are playing video games, is it a deficit or is it an asset? And the answer is yes. Sometimes it's a deficit, sometimes it's an asset. We have to inquire a bit more to see what aspects of that part of the culture are valuable and what are not. And then at the same time, you have to make the effort that you describe, which is hard, is how do you watch their programs as well as them watching your programs? And we have to, and you don't do that in 5 minutes. That takes time as well. How do you deal with it?
Oh, yeah, I do actually try to keep up with some of the lingo. For example, I might talk to the kids and see what their favourite games are. PUBG is a really big one in Asia. I'm sure you probably had the kids talk about it. Just kind of engaging them, kind of like a recess, like, oh, so what's your favourite character or whatever. Can be a good opening up to kind of share a bit about their life and who they play with.
Yeah. The great asset you have is that you look completely different from a lot of the kids you teach. And so you can be this weird anthropologist wandering into their classroom, asking questions that the people who know them really closely would never ask. And so you can get things from them that they might never tell anybody else, because you're just this weird guy from whatever country you're from, who's asking these bizarre questions, but they'll humour you.
Thank you, Laurie.
Welcome.
Great question. Joanne, you have a question?
Yes. Yes, my name is Joanne, and it's a privilege for us to have you here tonight. I work as a native English teacher at a local primary school teaching English readers and drama. And I have a question for you, so it's quite on my first minute now. So when a society or a school goes through educational change, teaching professionals are required to follow and change their teaching practices accordingly. But however, there are teachers who have failed or just resist to change. So I would like to ask for suggestions for the school or for us who has to work with them, collaborate with them. So what are the suggestions for us to do them?
Terrific. So, first of all, Joanne, you have not disappointed me. That's the first thing, which is I've never yet been in a group of educators talking about change. Never yet where no one has said, how do you deal with teachers who are resistant to change? So, like everywhere, every country, every place, there's always people who look like they're resistant to change. And if one of them's about to retire, and you think, great, they're going to retire, nobody will be resistant to change anymore. The moment they've gone, someone will rise up in their place and take that role within the community. Just like you've got a naughty kid in the class, and then you hear they're leaving, they're going to move to another school, and you think, I'm going to have no more naughty kids. And then somebody rises up to take their place in the class. It's bizarre, all right? So first understand, you'll always have this problem, okay? You'll always have this problem. You'll never cure it. You'll have to manage it. The key thing is to understand what the problem is. And the problem is that, as we talk about in the book, teachers appear to resist change for a number of reasons. Some teachers just don't like the change. So they don't resist all change. They just resist this change. And they resist this change because they don't agree with it, or they don't agree with the way it's being implemented, which is you're told to do it, you have to do it by now, you've never been consulted, you don't have enough resources, you don't have enough time. So the first thing is sometimes the resistors are right. We need to create an environment where they're able to say that. get it out on the table and talk about it and deal with it. Second, I suppose it's a good change and not a bad change or a badly managed change. So let's suppose it's a good one. Why do teachers resist change then? And well, teachers are not all the same. So some teachers are what you call disenchanted. And by disenchanted, it means literally they've lost the enchantment or they've lost the magic. They used to have the magic and now it's gone. So if you could go back in time, like Doctor Who, I don't know if any of you watch Doctor Who, you could go get in your TARDIS, go back in time and see them teach 20 years ago, you'd have seen a fantastic teacher. And if you could take them back in time and show, which would be fabulous if you could, and they can see the fantastic teacher they used to be. The question is what happened to them? And some got sick, some got tired, but usually what happened is they had bad experiences of change before. They committed themselves to change, and then once, twice, 3 times, and then the money disappeared, or the principal left, and another principal came in and said, we're not going this way, we're going that way. And so they repeatedly, they commit to something, and then they get let down. And the best analogy I can have is, unless you're an incurable optimist, if you've had 3 failed marriages, you probably don't say, oh, it doesn't matter, let's try a 4th one. But you might start to think after 3, there's something about marriage that isn't, unless you're Elizabeth Taylor, or it's like 9 marriages, that that marriage isn't for you. So they become disenchanted, and they think that there's no point committing yourself to change. But if you look at their classrooms, they're often doing very good things with their kids in their classroom. They don't just want to be swept up with all these young teachers who are naively committing to their first ever change, but they're going to be disappointed, they just don't know it yet. They just don't want to get involved in these big school-wide changes with you. And good leaders and good colleagues can turn those people around by helping them get the magic back. And if they believe that it will make a difference to the kids and that it will last and not go away, they can get the magic back. Most teachers are resistant to change, either because it's a bad change or because they've had bad experiences of change. There's a tiny group that's left who didn't like change or teaching when they came into it. They went in for the wrong reasons. They were stuck or couldn't think of what else to do. And then they didn't know where else to go, and they don't like teaching, and they don't like children, and they don't even like themselves very much. But this is typically a very tiny group. And if you deal with the rest, you shrink them to a very small size. And at that point, it's usually if you have a good collaborative community, it's the colleagues who will drive them out, not the principal. You just create the feeling that this is no longer a place that they can come into work every day and get away with it and be tolerated by their colleagues. So it's always there, you'll have to manage it, but understand the person first.
Thank you very much, Joanne, for the question. Are you doing okay, Andy?
I'm okay.
Yeah,
How about
okay.
you?
Good. We've still got a few more questions for you. So, Jen, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, my name is Jen. I teach at a primary school, all girls, just near here.
Yeah.
And I was very fascinated by the Fanling School example of the open school, where people could come into a classroom and observe and write feedback online. And actually the teacher took the criticism really well, because I remember one line, it shouldn't be about the teacher's personality, the feedback. It should be about the techniques. And I wonder, because I'm personally quite scared of like lesson observations and all that. What are some good ways of giving feedback to? Because we also have to do lesson observations for our peers. So what are some good ways of giving feedback and also for receiving it without taking it personally?
Yeah. So we're all a little bit nervous about feedback, usually, about people watching us while we're doing the thing we're doing. If you're doing an operation in an operating theatre, you have to get used to other people watching you. So it's if you always teach alone, and then you have people watching you twice a year, it's much harder to get feedback than it is if you are more often used to being with other teachers when you're teaching or planning or doing other things. So there's two answers to your question. The first is a cultural answer, which is about the nature of relationships and community. So if your community is usually you're on your own, and you're with your own class, you plan all your own stuff, you're responsible for your own kids, your problems are your problems, don't bring your problems to me. If that's the culture in your school, and then twice a year somebody comes to watch you, whether it's your principal or a teacher leader or a visitor in your school, you're going to be very nervous about somebody coming in. But if you're used to adults coming in and out of your class, which may be parent helpers, I forget what year was it you're in? P4?
P3.
Yeah, P3, P4. If you're used to people coming into your class, perhaps visitors, perhaps student teachers from the university, perhaps colleagues, if you're able to teach a class together, in a larger group sometimes, you'll feel a little less threatened about this dramatic occasion when somebody comes in to watch. So I think that's the first thing. And something that impresses me about Fanling is that people come and visit and give feedback, not just on those 2 occasions a year when 100 people will come into the school, but also they'll ask student teachers to give them feedback on their classes when they're applying for jobs within the school. So it becomes part of the culture and part of the way that they operate. Then I think there are a set of structural questions or protocol questions about how you give the feedback. Fanling has a very clear set of protocols that, for instance, ask for positive and critical feedback, and in the protocols separate the criticism from the critic. So they might ask half the room to be critical and half the room to be positive. And which group you're in is random. So if you're a really critical person, you don't necessarily end up in the critical group. So you don't have people who whine and complain all the time or are never satisfied, but it becomes part of the role rather than part of the person. Secondly, the protocol of Fanling is that the lesson that people are giving feedback on is a lesson that teachers have planned collaboratively, tested out and refined collaboratively, and then one of them will present it. But it's not her lesson, it's their lesson. So when the criticism comes back, it's not a criticism of the person, it's a criticism of the lesson. And even when people are giving the criticisms, they're guided to have a respectful tone and to be understanding of the teacher's situation, perhaps the number of children or the backgrounds that they come from or the difficulty of the concept or whatever it might be. So feedback makes us all a bit nervous, I think, and both the culture and the protocols, but it's very important to have it, and both the culture and the protocols protect us somewhat. And in teaching we're probably more nervous than anybody else because we're very self-critical. We don't need anybody else to be critical of us, because we're quite critical enough about like how many, like when I get evaluations, I get 100 evaluations, and 85 of them will give me a 5, and 12 of them will give me a 4, and then I'll get 3 3s, and I'll spend the next half hour worrying about the 3s, rather than thinking about that I lost the 3s, okay? Rather than thinking about the 5s and the 4s. So we're even more sensitive, I think, than other people are, because we're educators.
Thank you very much, Jen, for the question. We still have about 15 minutes, just under 15 minutes, so we've gone around the tables, but maybe we can take a few more questions. So I'm going to go back to table 1. Jay, do you have a question?
Sure. I don't have it written down, but this kind of goes off of what you're just saying. So I was looking through your website earlier.
Sorry, could you give everybody on Facebook your name?
Sorry. My name is Jade. I teach primary school here as well. I focus on literacy. I teach P1 to 6. So there was an article on your website that stuck out to me, and it kind of branches off from what you're just saying. And it was about teachers' guilt. And stemming from the self-criticism, how do you feel about, how do you deal with that sort of thing? Because you may have 10 great lessons, but then it's the one bad one that you might think about all weekend, right? The type of things is kind of hard to turn off your mind when you go home thinking about those things. Maybe you're being overly self-critical. Not you, but just in general. Myself, personally, this is something I deal with all the time. So, just like to hear your thoughts on that.
So, there are 2 answers. One is, I could give you the name of a good psychiatrist. And that'll take up many sessions, and they'll go through your childhood and your upbringing, and they'll make a great deal of money off you by that. But there's a simpler answer. So in the article, you'll remember, I talk about guilt bags. So your guilt bag is, this is really before everything is on an iPad. But your guilt bag are, ask yourself the question, how much stuff do you take home? Like, how many kids' assignments do you take home? How many things to mark, read, look at, respond to? Then, you go home. You're probably a bit tired when you get home. You probably fall asleep on the couch or watch some rubbish on TV. And then, then you'll have dinner. Then it gets like 8 o'clock, something like that. And about 8:30, you start to bring out the pile of books, but you're going a bit slow now because you've had a long day. And you get through about 20% of the stuff you've brought with you. And then you take it all back the next day. And the next day you bring it all home again. And you also have this unrealistic goal about all the work you'll want when you get home. Now, part of that is because you're a pathological perfectionist, but part of it is also in that bag are all your kids, and you're not leaving the kids at school. The kids are with you when you come home, and you really want to get through reading all that stuff. And I'm still the same. I've got a doctoral student who has to present in April, and I've got to read the next to last draft of her dissertation. And I've not read as much of it today as I was planning to. And after this, I'll take it out. I'll get it out on the MTR. I'll read some more when I get home. I'll probably fall asleep before I've finished it. And that is because she needs to finish her dissertation. And I care about her. And I care about her work being done. And that's just one. You have like 30, 60, 90, 100, however many classes you've got. And this is, and when you put them in your bag, the bag represents the weight of your guilt. So when you carry this bag home like a burden, your burden represents how big your guilt is. So if you have a small bag, you have a little bit of guilt. If you have a huge bag, you have a lot of guilt. If you put bags inside your bag, right, so you've got a bag that holds other bags, you have unbearable, literally, as well as metaphorically, unbearable guilt. So you can coach people just to take less home and be more realistic. That's one thing you can do. But if you teach alone, you'll have more guilt, and the guilt will be less bearable. If you teach together, you will set ambitious but realistic expectations for each other. And another indicator is what happens when you're sick. So when you're sick, do you go into school or do you stay home? In an individualistic culture, you probably go into school because you don't want people to think badly of you because you stayed home with a bit of flu, okay? Because they'll have been much sicker and coming another time, and you don't want to feel you're a slacker compared to them. If you work in a collaborative culture, people will look at you and say, my God, what's the matter with you? You need to go home. A, you need to go home to get better. B, we don't want to catch you. So, again, the attitude is totally different depending on whether you're on your own or whether you're in a culture that supports you. So, two answers. One is psychiatry, and the other is to work in a collaborative culture. It'll also, a bit of guilt's good. A bit of guilt is, don't get rid of all of it. A bit of guilt is very good.
Thank you. So we have Fiona.
Thank you so much. We learned so much. I read on the website that you had a great teacher who is 90 years old. I'm not sure how old she is now. Or...
She's passed away, I'm afraid, yeah.
Do you mind sharing how she impacted your life, or how she made you to become an educator?
Yeah.
I would love to hear that. Thank you.
Sometimes we don't appreciate how much people are impacting our lives at the time that they are impacting our lives. That also applies to our parents. Right? When we're 14, we don't often turn around to our parents and say, I'm so grateful for how much you're impacting my life in a positive way. I wanted to go, oh, whatever, So sometimes it takes you realise a bit that you're picking things up from your teacher or your mentor. But as time goes on, you increasingly realise what an incredible influence they had on you. Something I don't talk about there is as a student in her class, she was so incredibly unusual. And again, what I don't talk about there, but that is in my memoir, is if I were in school now, I'd be diagnosed with ADD and probably medicated because I was very fidgety. So that my parents would say I got a thing called St. Vitus dance. And St. Vitus dance is actually a clinical condition where you can't keep still, and you're like this all the time. So very fidgety. I talk a lot. I'd finish people's sentences before they had. I made wisecrack remarks with the teacher all the time. So the memoir talks about this, and I think unusually for so many people just thought I was naughty or not disciplined. Couldn't remember my books and equipment. I was messy. So like papier mâché would end up like all over my face and down at my clothes. To this day, I can't fasten my shoelaces. They're always undone within like 20 minutes. One thing, particularly looking back, she did two things which great teachers do. was first she understood me. Well, she really, we say now, she got me. And that's one of the most important things a teacher can do is to make a child feel known and feel understood. And but she, just because she got me, she didn't let me get away with being too much of me. And that's important for a teacher to do as well. For your benefit, for the other kids' benefits, and for your lifelong benefit in the future. And so, when I went back to become a teacher, I did 2 weeks observation in her class as a student teacher before I went to Teachers College, and then I could begin to see with new eyes what it was exactly she was doing to create the kinds of results that she got. So I began to see it from the teacher's side of the desk and not just the child's side of the desk. And you know, the rest of you may or may not have seen this, but two things stand out for me subsequently was when she was about in her late 70s, I just wrote to her to thank her. And I sent her a little book that I'd written, co-authored book, that was in big print, because I thought she'd appreciate that. And I wrote and said, you know, I said, you probably don't remember me, but you know, I was in your class, and a lot's happened since then. And I did say, actually, just my one small piece of revenge was I said, you know, one thing was I had terrible handwriting and talked too much, and you should probably know that I now make my living as a writer and a speaker. And but I thanked her for all she'd done, and I said, you know, this book, you inspired me to really go into education. And this book sold 100,000 copies. It's like a bestseller. And to the extent that you've influenced me, you've influenced all these other people as well. And she wrote back and said she didn't remember me. And she remembered me, thought you probably remember this from reading it. She remembered me for, I'll have to show you, sorry for the people on Facebook, but she remembered me for my Spanish dancing, because dancing was compulsory in the curriculum, so I used to enjoy going and so it's interesting what your teachers remember about you. And then in 2004, my old school, which was now in the 8th worst town in England in terms of social deprivation, wrote to me asking me to lay the foundation stone for the new school and the new building, and which was a total surprise. And I said I'd do it. I knew she was still alive, and she was about 85 by then. And I said I'd do it if I could do it with her. And so we did. And it's there for all time, actually. Well, as long as the building lasts, it's there. So if you had a great teacher, and on the moment when you realise it, let them know before it's too late. Because it's a wonderful thing for them. And sometimes it's a nice thing for you too.
Thank you very much. And I can see we've run out of time, unfortunately, but we hope we can invite you back again when you come back to Hong Kong.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think you agree that we've learned a great deal tonight, and I hope that we can continue this conversation next week. On behalf of the class, thank you very much for joining us. And I wish you could stay longer, but I'm sure that if you want to read Professor Hargreaves' works and books, the one that sold 100,000 copies.
It was 100! It's 1,000,000 copies, it was this big!
The one that sold 100,000 inspired by your teacher?
It was called What's Worth Fighting For in Your School.
Yeah, so we should take a look at that. But thank you very much. Let's put our hands together for Professor